I hitched a ride, never doing that again. The Oldsmobile died just outside of Davenport. Steam hissed from under the hood like an angry dragon. December air bit at my exposed skin as I stared at the engine, utterly defeated. I was 2 states away from home, 21 years old, and officially stranded. My cell service was non-existent. After a few fruitless attempts to coax the car back to life, I did the only thing I could think of. I started walking toward the faint glow of lights on the horizon. The highway patrol found me an hour later, shivering and close to tears. They took me to a dingy gas station a few miles back. The attendant, a kid with more piercings than I thought humanly possible, barely grunted when I asked about a mechanic. Earl's garage, he mumbled, pointing vaguely west. But Earl ain't cheap. Earl wasn't just expensive, he was booked solid until after Christmas. My meager savings wouldn't cover a hotel for that long, let alone food. I was officially screwed. That's when Walter offered the advice. He was sitting on a rickety stool near the coffee machine, nursing a cup of something that looked like tar. "Heading west, are you, girly?" he rasped, his voice like gravel. I nodded miserably. "Don't you hitchhike out there," Walter said, his eyes narrowed. "This road ain't what it used to be." I scoffed. "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" He just shook his head, took another sip of his coffee, and went back to staring out the window. His words, however, stuck with me. I spent the next few hours alternating between calling my mom a tearful, static-filled conversation where she promised to figure something out and pacing outside, trying to flag down a ride. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but the temperature plummeted with it. My hope dwindled just as fast. Then a semi-truck, gleaming chrome and all, slowed to a halt beside me. The driver, a man with a friendly face and a neatly trimmed beard, rolled down the window. "Need a ride, miss?" he asked, his voice warm and reassuring. "Name's Elias." Against my better judgment, against Walter's warning, I accepted. The cab of the truck was surprisingly clean, smelling faintly of pine and coffee. Elias was chatty, telling me about his route, his wife, his dogs. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy, and my anxiety began to ease. Maybe Walter was just an old crank and this whole ordeal would actually work out. We drove for a couple of hours, the darkness punctuated by the headlights of passing cars and the occasional flickering neon sign of a roadside diner. I learned that Elias was heading to Montana, a bit further than my destination, but he offered to drop me off at a bus station in Billings. I was incredibly grateful. Around 10, we stopped at a truck stop. I went inside to use the restroom and grab a soda. When I came back, Elias was talking on the CB radio, his voice low and serious. He cut the conversation short as soon as he saw me. "Everything okay?" I asked. He smiled a little too brightly, just checking in with dispatch. "Long haul, you know." We continued driving. The landscape grew more desolate, the towns smaller and farther apart. The sky was a vast, ink-eye canvas sprinkled with stars. The silence in the cab grew heavier, punctuated only by the rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. That's when things started to feel off. Elias started telling stories, rambling tales about his past, his voice taking on a strange, almost manic quality. He talked about a childhood spent in a small town I'd never heard of, about a tragic accident that claimed the lives of his parents, about a friend. He kept referring to him as the boy, never by name. The boy lived in the woods, Elias explained, and they'd play together until dark. He said they were closer than brothers. He kept looking at me when he told the boy stories with a wild grin that showed too much gum. The stories became more and more disturbing, filled with details that made my stomach churn. He spoke of strange rituals, of whispered promises in the dead of night, of a darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of things. I tried to change the subject, but he would always steer it back to the boy. He began to act out the boy's voice with a terrible falsetto impression. Elias's eyes, once friendly, now held a glint of something unsettling. He glanced at me at the corner of his vision, every single time. I noticed, too, that we hadn't passed another car in what felt like hours. The road stretched before us, a ribbon of black disappearing into the infinite darkness. My cell service remained stubbornly absent. I feigned sleep, hoping to avoid further conversation, but even with my eyes closed, I could feel Elias's gaze on me. I could hear him humming under his breath, a tuneless, unsettling melody. Then he started talking to himself. "She's awake. She knows. The boy doesn't like her." I squeezed my eyes shut harder, pretending to be asleep. "He doesn't like liars either. I told him you were asleep, that you liked the boy." "She doesn't like the boy." Fear coiled in my stomach, cold and tight. I knew with a chilling certainty that I was in danger. I needed a plan, and I needed one fast. The opportunity came when we stopped at another gas station, even more desolate than the last. This one was barely more than a shack, with a single flickering light bulb illuminating the dusty pumps. Elias went inside to pay, leaving the keys in the ignition. It was now or never. I slipped behind the wheel, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it, the engine roaring to life. I gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I only had a few minutes before he realized what I was doing. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. The truck lurched forward, tires squealing on the gravel. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Elias burst out of the gas station, his face contorted with rage. He started running after the truck, screaming something I couldn't quite make out. I kept driving, the speedometer climbing higher and higher. The road was winding, narrow, and treacherous. Snow started to fall, blurring my vision. The truck felt enormous and unwieldy, but I couldn't slow down. Not now. I risked another glance in the rearview mirror. Elias was no longer in sight, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, remained. I drove for what felt like an eternity, the snow falling harder and harder. The road became increasingly treacherous, slick with ice. The truck fishtailed, threatening to spin out of control. Then I saw it. A sign barely visible through the swirling snow, "Abandoned mine, keep out." It was a long shot, but it was the only option I could think of. I yanked the wheel, turning onto the rutted dirt road that led toward the mine. The truck bounced violently, bottoming out on the frozen ground. I drove as far as I could until the road became impassable. I killed the engine, plunging the truck into near total darkness. I grabbed my purse and scrambled out, stumbling through the snow towards the gaping maw of the mine entrance. The air inside the mine was cold and damp, heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. I fumbled for my phone, praying for a signal. Nothing. I ventured deeper into the mine, the darkness closing in around me. I could hear the drip, drip, drip of water echoing through the tunnels. My heart pounded in my chest. Then I heard it, the crunch of boots on the snow outside. He had found me. I pressed myself against the cold, damp wall of the mine, trying to blend into the darkness. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps grew closer, echoing through the tunnels. I could hear Elias's voice, low and menacing. "Sarah," he called out, "I just want to talk. The boy is sad." I didn't answer. He continued to call my name, his voice growing more and more frantic. I could hear him moving through the tunnels, getting closer and closer. Then he turned a corner and I saw him. He was holding a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes wild. "Sarah," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Come out. Don't make the boy angry." I didn't move. He took a step closer, his eyes scanning the darkness. He paused, his gaze fixed on the spot where I was hiding. "I see you," he said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "The boy sees you too." He raised the flashlight, pointing it directly at me. Before he could react, I lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The flashlight flew from his hand, shattering against the rock wall. We struggled, rolling around in the dirt and mud. He was stronger than I thought, his grip like iron. He pinned me to the ground, his face inches from mine. "You can't escape the boy," he whispered, his breath hot on my face. "He's always watching." I screamed, kicking and clawing at him. I managed to knee him in the groin, and he cried out in pain, loosening his grip. I scrambled to my feet and ran deeper into the mine. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. I ran until I could no longer hear him, until my lungs burned and my legs ached. I collapsed against a wall, gasping for breath. I was lost, alone, and terrified. I didn't know how long I stayed there, huddled in the darkness. Time seemed to lose all meaning. I was cold, hungry, and exhausted. Then I heard a sound. A faint, distant sound. A siren. Hope surged through me, warming me from the inside out. I stumbled to my feet and started running towards the sound, praying that it was real. I emerged from the mine, blinking in the blinding light of a police car. A deputy, his face grim, approached me. "Are you Sarah?" he asked. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "We got a call about a stolen semi," he said, "and a disturbance." I told him everything about the broken-down car, about Elias, about the mine. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. They searched the mine, but they didn't find Elias. They found the broken flashlight, and they found signs of a struggle. But Elias was gone. They took me to the nearest hospital, where I was treated for exposure and shock. My mom arrived a few hours later, her face etched with worry. I was safe, but I would never be the same. The police investigated, but they couldn't find any trace of Elias. The truck was impounded, and I gave my statement. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. The dispatcher radio, on the other hand, offered a different story entirely. When the police finally tracked down the dispatch office that Elias claimed to work for, they found no record of him ever being employed there. There were no calls made by or received by Elias. Dispatch office. I'd asked my mom in the hospital. He said he had to check in with dispatch all the time. My mom shook her head, patting my hand reassuringly. "You were delirious, honey. It was probably a lie, but it hadn't been that he lied, it was how that mattered." He talked and rambled and grinned, but none of it made sense. He wasn't human. As I recovered, I tried to piece together what had happened. I kept coming back to Walter's, warning this road ain't what it used to be. What did he mean? Was Elias just a crazy trucker, or was there something more to it? Something supernatural? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something ancient and malevolent, something that had been lurking in the shadows of that desolate highway for generations, something to do with the boy. I tried to forget, to move on with my life. But the memory of Elias's eyes, the sound of his voice, the chilling tales he told, they haunted my dreams. I started doing research, scouring old newspapers and historical archives. I searched for stories of disappearances, of strange occurrences, of anything that might shed light on what I had experienced. And that's when I found it. A small article buried deep in the archives of a local newspaper. It was a story about a series of disappearances that had plagued the area decades ago. Young men, all of them hitchhikers, vanished without a trace. The article mentioned rumors of a highwayman, a shadowy figure who preyed on travelers along the desolate roads. The article also mentioned something else, something that made my blood run cold. A legend whispered among the locals of a cursed mine, a mine that was said to be haunted by a malevolent entity, a creature that craved human souls, and the boy the locals claimed was the creature. The article didn't mention any names, but the details were eerily familiar. I don't know what Elias was. Maybe he was just a deranged killer, driven mad by isolation and despair. Or maybe he was something else entirely, a pawn in a much larger, much darker game. All I know is that I will never hitchhike again, and I will never forget the road that wasn't what it used to be.